In 2005, director Paul Haggis and an ensemble cast gave the world a divisive picture of racial tensions in America.
In 2020, we try one of the world's most popular and famous bourbons.
The film is Crash.
The whiskey is Blanton's.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 2005 film Crash.
In LA, nobody touches you. We're always behind this metal and glass. I think we miss that touch so much that we crash into each other just so we can feel something.
So, Brad, how you doing today, man?
Bob, I am doing wonderful this day. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. It is a rainy day here in Akron, Ohio. I don't know what it's like down where you are, but we've got some thunderstorms rolling through the area as we record.
Yeah, I am actually in the exact same boat. The Film and Whiskey Nation may be hearing some of God's beauty, man. Thunderstorms are a great thing, and it's going to be a heck of an episode.
All right, Brad. Well, let's get into talking about today's movie.
Bob, we are in the middle of a series of it's a 15-year retrospective. They talk about how you can't really judge, the NFL draft for like 4 or 5 years. Well, I don't know if you can really judge a movie until you're 15 years out. So
at least that's what we're saying. Yeah.
So here we are. We're looking at some movies from 2005, and we have arrived at the Best Picture winner, an Oscar award-winning movie. I think it won 3 Oscars altogether. Called Crash. And this movie it's fast-paced. You're cutting back and forth between all sorts of different people. There's, all sorts of nice slow-motion montages with really beautiful music set to it. There's so many different things happening in this movie. And it's kind of become famous as a problematic movie, right?
Yeah, in some ways it has. I think there's 2 ways that it's become a problematic movie. The first is that I think the conversation on race in America has really moved far ahead of where this movie takes it. At the time this movie came out, it was held up by a lot of people as a really great representation of race in America. And I think in some ways it kind of captures what race was like in LA in the early 2000s, but it doesn't really advance the conversation about race in America at all. And honestly, I don't know how accurately it really portrays what race is like in America in 2020. But the other way that it has become really controversial is because this is the movie that beat Brokeback Mountain for Best Picture. And I think most critics now agree that that was one of the biggest Oscar upsets in history. And so this movie catches a lot of flack because it is perceived as being not as good as Brokeback Mountain. And the theory goes that the Academy, which has tended to lean very conservative in past years, was just not ready to give a movie about a gay couple Best Picture. And so they kind of threw it to the other hot button issue movie in Crash, and it was seen as a more safe choice. So, this movie comes in with a lot of baggage, Brad, and we're going to have to dissect some of that. But at the end of the day, we're here to talk about the quality of the movie itself. And I'm excited to get into talking about this movie with you.
Well, where would you like to start, Bob? I think that there's tons of different ways we can go with this movie. Just like Paul Haggis decided there was a billion different ways he wanted to go with the story. And so, I don't know, do you want to start by talking about the cinematography, the story itself, the actors? Obviously this is a pretty large ensemble cast that, there's a few pretty famous A-list names in there. But honestly, there's a lot of B to C list actors in there as well, because, a budget can only be so big.
Well, and this was a very small movie. I think it only cost like $6 million to make. So it really came out of nowhere. It was an indie darling. It worked its way up through the festival circuit. In some ways, the fact that this movie won Best Picture is really, truly an underdog story. Technically, it's listed on IMDb as being a 2004 film, not a 2005 film. It premiered at a couple festivals, I think, in 2004, but because it didn't get a theatrical release in the United States until 2005, it was considered a 2005 release for the Oscars. And that's the reason that it was allowed to compete against Brokeback Mountain and all the other films from that year.
Man, it's stuff like that where I'm just like, the Oscars are weird.
They really are, man.
They're just strange.
Right. But Brad, before we get into talking about any of the direction or the writing, the acting, we can't skip over America's favorite segment, which we call Brad Explains. This is where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. And Brad, will you enlighten us? Was this your first time seeing Crash?
This was my first time seeing Crash.
All right, cool. So I'm eager to hear what you have to say. Can you give our listeners a spoiler-filled breakdown of the plot of the movie Crash?
Well, Bob, I already used this term once, and I'm going to use it again. This is going to be a problematic Brad Explains.
Oh, why is that?
And the reason I say that is because I literally have no clue how to explain this movie.
You know what, Brad? It's actually really funny that you say that because I don't know if you're in the same boat as I am, but it's really hard for me to remember any of the characters' names in this movie. Like, I know most of the actors, by memory. I can talk about Don Cheadle or Brendan Fraser or Sandra Bullock, but I don't know who they play in this movie. And I think, even before we get into Brad Explains, I think that that's a knock against the screenplay because a lot of these characters are basically just playing archetypes or playing stereotypes. Like, Michael Pena is a fantastic actor, and I love him in everything he does. But I don't know what the hell his name is in this movie. He is just Hispanic locksmith. That's his character. Play the Hispanic locksmith. And so, I feel like in a way, I feel like I'm stereotyping people just by talking about the characters in this movie, but that's kind of how Paul Haggis presents them in his script.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about that with $1 Million Baby, right? And I'm sure we'll talk more about this later, about, Paul Haggis's kind of history in film and all that. But in the end, I think Haggis has a tendency to reduce people to their common stereotypes. And so I don't know if this is a good disclaimer or not, but Bob and I are both white. And so I do feel a sense of uncomfortability talking about this movie because you're right, Bob. I don't want to say this in any unhealthy way, but yeah, he's a Hispanic locksmith in this movie. And once again, I'm not saying that to be pejorative in any way, to be, looking down on anyone. It's unfortunately just the way Paul Haggis represented these people. And honestly, you don't hear people's names said in this movie.
Yeah, you don't.
And so, I know that Ludacris plays one of the main characters in this movie, but I can't tell you what his name was in the film. Can you?
No idea.
So I just want to say that as a disclaimer, take this episode with a grain of salt, I guess. Bob and I both want to love and care for people and respect them for who they are. And I think we're going to try to be open about the fact that there are some good things in this movie, but the way they represent race can be kind of reductionistic. And if we come across reductionistic in any way at all, I genuinely apologize. We want to love on people really, really well. So, Bob, would you say that's a fair statement to
Absolutely,
make?
Absolutely, Brad. So, yeah, let's get into this Brad Explains, because...
Yes, so Crash. It is a movie, as you might guess, about, I don't know, there's kind of a few car crashes in this movie. It's specifically about one. But the movie... Bob, I'm having a tough time getting into this, so I'm just going to talk about the theme of the movie. And the theme of this movie is that, A, everybody is prejudiced towards people who do not look like themselves. Would you say that's a fair point, A?
Absolutely.
And point B is that when we take time to listen to other people, to try and be open to their perspectives, that we can have healthier relationships with people who don't look like us. And that when we assume things about other people, it leads to unhealthy results in the world. And so I wanted to break that down first because the actual plot of this movie is convoluted. There's literally, I would probably say about 10, maybe 8 to 12 separate characters in this movie. And the story of this movie is how their lives intertwine in random ways. One man, Don Cheadle, is a police detective, and his little brother has run away from home and is kind of a criminal. and he gets killed by a police detective who's off duty. And this police detective is someone who witnessed his partner abusing his power and feeling up a black woman at a traffic stop that shouldn't have happened. But this police partner killed the brother of Don Cheadle, and the medical examiner who helps Don Cheadle see his brother in the morgue. This medical examiner is the daughter of a shop owner, a Middle Eastern shop owner.
Yeah, I think they're Persian.
Persian, they specifically say. And this shop owner had a Hispanic locksmith that basically told him you need to get a new door. And I could keep going, but like all of their lives are intertwined in some way. The only core part of the movie that I guess I'll mention is that Matt Dillon plays this middle-aged, pretty racist cop who pulls over Tandy Newton and Terrence Howard, and he ends up feeling up Tandy Newton right in front of Terrence Howard and is basically taunting him about it. It genuinely is a disturbing scene. But then later in the film, Tandy Newton gets into a car accident, and guess who shows up to try and help her? It's Matt Dillon. You know, and kind of the moral of the story is that, like, Matt Dillon now sees her as a human because he has to rescue her, and there's some sort of reconciliation there. Bob, that's it. That's all I'm going to say for Brad Explains. This is a tough one, dude.
Yeah. So, like, I'm really struggling with how to talk about this movie in terms of, like, plot versus theme and scenes versus overall plot. And, like, it's really hard to say this movie has a plot, Brad, because, like, at its most basic level, it is the story of, you know, like you said, a dozen or so people whose lives intersect each other over the course of 36 hours in Los Angeles and all of the racial tension that's underpinning all of that. But it's really hard to say that many of the characters in this movie have real arcs. I mean, like, they all end up in a different place than they started, but all of the characters in this movie really feel to me like cogs in a machine, and the machine is all of these plot mechanics that Paul Haggis in his script really wanted to kind of build to these few set pieces. It's almost like an action movie where we talk about action set pieces that, you know, whatever's happening in the Fast and the Furious doesn't matter so much. What matters is that they are dropping cars out of a plane, and like the plot is designed to get us to the point where they're dropping the cars out of the plane. This movie kind of feels like that. Like, there's incredibly convoluted and contrived ways to get these people into situations where you go, oh my gosh, that's the person from the other thing. And that's supposed to be like this mind-blowing revelation, and they all cross each other's lives at some point. But like I said, it's super contrived. And that's not to say that the big set pieces that we build up to aren't powerful. Like that scene in the car with Tandy Newton and Matt Dillon, really powerful scene. The scene where Michael Pena, playing, you know, Hispanic locksmith, his daughter supposedly gets shot, and we have to watch that happen, and you find out that it didn't happen for another contrived reason. But, like, there are moments of emotional power in this movie, but the problem is, Brad, I could never escape the idea that I was being manipulated into those moments. Do you know what I mean? Like, they still kind of worked, but I was also like, this is not how real life plays out. Yes, people's lives intersect in ways you would never imagine, but not like this. It was like, you know, it got to the point where like every minor character was showing up in another scene just so we could see that they were there. You know, when Don Cheadle's brother is in the morgue and you see that the medical examiner is the daughter of the Persian shopkeeper, I was like, did we really need that connection? Did that did that make any difference at all in the movie? Everything about this just seems so contrived and manipulative. And that's what I'm struggling with, because parts of it work, but like, is it worth the rest of it?
Well, and there's no example that's more problematic than that of my girl Sandy B and her role in this movie.
Oh my gosh.
Like Sandra Bullock is great. I love her. I genuinely think she's a good actress. But in this movie, the script is just so bad for her, because the problem is the director, Haggis, does not tell us in any specific way which of these stories means more than another story. And so while you have, you know, the reconciliation of Terrence Howard and Ludacris and their kind of growth in a relationship at the end of the movie is treated with the same respect as Sandra Bullock being this racist stepwife in, Hollywood type stepwife who falls and twists her ankle, and now she's reconciled with her Hispanic housekeeper.
I would like the locks changed again in the morning. And you know what? You might mention that we'd appreciate it if next time they didn't send a gang member.
A gang member?
Yes.
Well, you mean that kid in there?
Yes. The guy in there with the shaved head, the pants around his ass, the prison tattoo.
Those are not prison tattoos.
Oh, really? And he's not gonna go sell our key to one of his gangbanger friends the moment he is out our door.
We've had a really tough night. I think it'd be best if you just went upstairs right now.
And what, wait for them to break in? I just had a gun pointed in my face.
You lower your voice.
And it was my fault because I knew it was gonna happen. But if a white person sees two black men walking towards her and she turns and walks in the other direction, she's a racist, right? Well, I got scared and I didn't say anything, and 10 seconds later, I had a gun in my face. Now, I am telling you, your amigo in there is gonna sell our key to one of his homies, and this time it'd be really great if you acted like you actually gave a shit.
And that's treated with the same amount of gravity as Don Cheadle's brother being killed.
Yeah.
Like, I
really appreciate that you bring that up, because I made a note of that. I was like, what's her purpose in this movie? Like, she is there to be, her character is literally wife of the district attorney. And the district attorney in this movie is played by Brendan Fraser, who, his story kind of intersects 3 or 4 different stories. And I feel like, he doesn't really have too much to do either, but he's at least a little bit more vital to the mechanics of the plot than Sandra Bullock is. Her whole character is, I had a gun pointed at me, so I'm going to be racist towards Michael Pena when he's in my house. And then I'm going to continue being racist to my Hispanic, housekeeper. And then at the end of the movie, I'm going to fall down a flight of stairs and sprain my ankle. And that's going to be like some huge revelation for me that I need to be a better person. And like, we literally watch characters get shot and bleed to death in this movie. But Sandra Bullock's ankle is apparently just as important as, the lives of other characters are.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that this movie presents important questions that I think people genuinely need to struggle with. And honestly, I think some of the answers it gives are good. Like not every part of the script is problematic, but the problem with it is that it gives equal weight to all of the different answers and different resolutions that we see in the film. And when you weigh them against reality, it's just not the same. Like Sandra Bullock, reconciling with her housekeeper is not the same as Ludacris freeing a bunch of Southeastern Asians from the back of a van. Like, I don't know, man. This movie's just confusing. I don't always know where to go with it, because there's some performances that I think are great. I think that Ludacris and his partner, who, the name of the actor is escaping me right now, I think that their scenes are captivating and interesting. I think that they ask good questions. They have good back and forth. So, like, there's parts of this movie that I'm completely behind, but then there's other parts of the movie that I'm just kind of like, I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. So I think we should talk, before we go to break, about Paul Haggis, because we talked about him with $1 Million Baby and how some of the characters in that movie, some of the dialogue in that movie was so on the nose, like so obvious that it just could have been done a little more subtly. And I think that applies to this whole movie as well, because, some people in this movie get to be human beings, and other people in this movie get to just be their race or their ethnicity. Like Michael Pena, I keep coming back to him. I love him. I want him to win all of the Oscars someday, because what he does with his role in this movie versus what he has actually given on the page, like his entire role is to be the poor Hispanic locksmith that, he has a daughter and he loves her. And that's it. That's his whole character. And because he's one of the few good people in the movie, that means he doesn't really have anywhere to go as a character. He doesn't have a character arc. At the end of the movie, he's the same person that he is at the beginning of the movie. And so I really struggle with Haggis as a writer. He was not the only one that wrote this script. He had a writing partner, but I think you can really see his fingerprints all over this script. This screenplay won Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars. This was apparently the best script written in that year. And I'm really shocked at that, because I think it comes out a lot in the dialogue. the dialogue in this movie is just not realistic. And he does such an over-the-top job to drive home the point that everyone's racist. Like, one of the very first interactions in the movie is when the Persian shopkeeper and his daughter are going to the gun store to buy a gun. And the guy behind the counter of the gun store is racist. And he's racist towards the Persian shop owner. And he labels him as like an Afghani or an Iraqi. And he's like, you know, he says something about like, we're going to fly airplanes into your mud huts and incinerate your friends. And the way he says it, I'm like, who uses the word incinerate in a racist tirade? Like, people do not talk like this, Paul Haggis. And I think it's especially cringy in the scene after Tandy Newton gets felt up by Matt Dillon's, you know, corrupt cop, when she and her husband, Terrence Howard, go home and they're arguing with each other about what it means to be black. The point of the scene is very clear, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with the scene being in the movie, but like, this is where you need someone that's not a 45-year-old white male in the writer's room, because like, even the way that they're arguing with each other about what it means to be black, and Tandy Newton says like, I'm sorry I didn't shuck and jive, and I'm like, Paul Haggis, like, what are you doing right now? This is not how characters talk, and there are instances where his deficiencies as a writer are actually like super offensive, I think.
And yet there's certain parts of this movie that I think are well written. And even when they don't necessarily represent how normal people might talk, you know, I'm thinking honestly of the start of the movie when Ludacris is talking with his partner throughout the film, and he's talking about the different types of oppression that Black people have faced over the years and how music is used as an oppressive tool. And it honestly reminded me of Do the Right Thing. Like, he kind of felt like bugging out, you know, when he's explaining why they need people of color on the wall at Sal's pizzeria.
Yeah.
And so there are parts of this script where I'm like, man, I think that Haggis is getting at something really beautiful here. But in the end, I think the biggest thing that holds Haggis back is the fact that this movie feels like an extended television show.
Oh, Brad.
And you know, as I was reading more about Paul Haggis, I found out that he spent, you know, over 20 years in television before he made the jump to film with $1 Million Baby and then a year later with Crash. And it just makes sense. Like, when I think about television, other than your main characters in television, pretty much everybody is a cardboard cutout, right? Like, you don't have time to be delved in. Everybody's kind of a stereotype for the main characters to bounce off of. And so to me, it just makes sense that this is an extended television show. Like, it kind of feels like an extended version of Lost or of other of these big ensemble casts, where, you know, no, everybody kind of bounces off of each other and, oh man, like, this is neat. You know, it's the guy from the shop, and now he's not at the shop, but he's in the medical room. Like, wow. And it's just kind of reductionistic, and it leads to a lot of the problems that we've been discussing, Bob.
Brad, I am so happy that you brought this up, because I made a note that said this would have been one really good long TV episode, because like, I feel like if you take this out of theaters and you cut the F words out of it and you put it on NBC, it's like winning Emmys.
Yeah.
The way that they don't develop these characters, it reminds me of TV episodes, because like with a show, like, it reminded me in a way of This Is Us. I don't know if you've ever watched that show.
Bob, I was literally just thinking that this is like a less defined, like, honestly, like, if this had been a TV show, people would go to This Is Us and be like, yes, you know, the natural spiritual successor to the TV show Crash.
Yeah, This Is Racism. That's the coming this fall from NBC. You know what I mean? Like, that's what this feels like. And the problem is that even on a show like This Is Us, you have 20 episodes or whatever it is to develop characters' arcs. And so if you take any 2 episodes and you're cutting back and forth between all the main characters, they don't go super far from point A to point B. But over 20 episodes, you get a really great defined arc. I feel like this is if you just took 2 episodes out of a season of TV and tried to force all these characters to have really defined arcs that you need 20 hours to develop. Like, they just don't behave in rational ways. They don't behave like normal people behave. And it's because Paul Haggis is trying to force them, you know, to force change onto them and really deliver this powerful emotional ending. And I just don't know if you can really do that in 2 hours of time.
And I think another perfect example of that is the story of the Persian shopkeeper. Like, in the end, do I think that he would actually take his gun, search, find the invoice out of the trash, drive to his house, shoot him in the chest? It just felt super duper unbelievable for what I had seen of the Persian shopkeeper up until that point. And yet somehow he shoots this little girl, finds out that it was actually blanks that his daughter had bought from the shop. And then he comes back and he's calling this little girl his angel. And like, I'm not sure, like, and this is me being genuine. I don't know enough about Islam as a religion to know if that's like a thing. There's something about angels that come and guard them. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the matter. But what I will say is nothing was set up for that to be a thing.
Yeah.
And like, why would the Persian shopkeeper feel redeemed in those moments? Like, the dude just got away with murder.
Well, so here's the weird dichotomy of that. He didn't know they were blanks, and even at the end of the movie, he doesn't know they're blanks. They show his daughter sneak away, and she very discreetly picks up the box of blanks, and we as the audience see that they were blanks. But he actually thinks that he shot this little girl and that nothing happened to her, and because of that, he thinks a miracle has occurred. And again, you're right, Brad. They don't really establish like the religion of this man as something that is super important to him. And so that weird redemptive arc doesn't really work. But the problem for me that I wrote down about his character arc is at the end of the day, he's going to prison. Yeah. I imagine Michael Pena is going to call the authorities and say, hey, this man came to my house and tried to shoot us. Because even the end of that scene, while it's really powerful, if you think about it for longer than 5 seconds, like, it ends with the whole family just weirdly walking away and then closing the door, and then nothing else happens. If that man really had a gun with bullets in it, wouldn't he be trying to get into your house and kill you some more? And so, like, I have to imagine that while all these other characters get these great redemptive arcs, and we see the Persian shopkeeper say, wow, she's my angel and I'm a changed man, bro, you're gonna get arrested in the next couple days and you're gonna go to prison for attempted murder. Like, that's where your story's going.
Well, and honestly, the more I think about it, the more I think I might have been making an assumption there. I don't know if the movie ever once says that he follows the Islamic religion. I might have been assuming that based on the stereotype that Paul Haggis gave me. So there's just so many things with this movie where I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know what to do. I think that what I really need is a little bit of Blanton's in my soul to keep talking about this movie.
Brad, let's get to it. All right, so today we are checking out Blanton's Bourbon. Blanton's is made by the Buffalo Trace Company. It's owned by Sazerac. It has a really unique history in the history of bourbon. The brand was launched in 1984 by the Buffalo Trace Distillery's master distiller at the time, Elmer T. Lee, the legendary distiller. And it is known for being the first modern bourbon to be called a single barrel bourbon. This was not really a thing in the latter half of the 20th century until Buffalo Trace started to make the Blanton's line. And over the years, Blanton's has really become a highly sought after and rare whiskey to find. It's very weird. I don't know how Buffalo Trace does this, but like, they have found a way to make all of their whiskeys be super sought after. We keep bringing this up with them. I mean, it's like your regular Buffalo Trace is a $25 bottle of whiskey that you can't find anywhere. Your Weller Special Reserve, your Weller Antique, they're going for hundreds of dollars at places. And Blanton's is just like that. It's kind of like an inside joke with people who own liquor stores, especially in Kentucky, that people just walk in all the time and say, y'all have Blanton's? Because people know Blanton's for some reason. They know the cool little toppers that have the horses on them. and that's the whiskey they want. And it's always, always sold out. Like right now in the state of Ohio, you can't get any. The only reason that we have any in our glass today is because our friend Bourbon and Stuff sent us a sample of it. So Brad, we are sipping on a whiskey today that is highly sought after. And to be honest, I don't quite know why.
Well, I've had Blanton's once before. Just my first impressions. It's a good whiskey.
Yeah.
I would say it's high quality.
Sure.
It's fine. Honestly, the packaging, it genuinely is one of the coolest bottles you will own.
Absolutely.
Like, you should keep it and keep it on your shelf even when it's empty. So I get it. It's a neat, fun, interesting whiskey. But once again, Bob, like you said, it's almost like Buffalo Trace has like cast some sort of spell over the country that just causes them to go nuts for Blanton's. And that's fine. I'm excited to try it. It's not something I get to drink very often.
Right.
But I don't know. Is it any greater than any other whiskey? We might as well try and find out.
I mean, the packaging does play a big part of this, I think, Brad, because you have, like I said, the topper for the bottle is, it has this little like kind of brass horse on top of it. And there are actually 8 different toppers that you can get and collect, and they all have a letter carved into them, and they spell out Blanton's when you get them all. So, I mean, it's like a collector's item for people. But at the end of the day, what we're drinking here is a 93 proof single barrel bourbon that has been aged somewhere between 6 and 8 years. So, I mean, honestly, I think the comparison for this in terms of like what's inside here is Elijah Craig. You know, that's a 94 proof that's probably aged for about the same length of time. So that's kind of what we should be anticipating in terms of nose, taste, things like that. So Brad, what are you picking up on the nose of this Blanton single barrel?
Well, while you've been blathering on, I've actually been nosing the whiskey.
Good. So give me your notes then.
Honestly, Bob, I'm getting a little bit of cherry here. There's a nice kind of richness to the nose that I don't always find on a bourbon. There's not a ton of that deep caramely notes, although it's present. I'm not really getting any hints of vanilla, but there's some really nice fruity notes that I'm genuinely enjoying. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 on the nose.
Yeah, Brad, I really like this as well. I will say that it is like tons of alcohol on the nose too. Like it definitely, you know, as Ron Burgundy would say, it stings the nostrils in a good way.
It's a nice Kentucky hug on your nose.
That's right. But all it is for me as well is like tons of fruit and alcohol. And if you can push through the fact that there's so much alcohol, I get a lot of cherry and I get a lot of orange peel on this as well. It's very citrus forward for me. I like this a lot. I'm also going to give it an 8 out of 10 on the nose. So Brad, what do you say we give this a sip?
Whew.
Oh gosh, that's harsh.
Yeah, dude.
Holy sh! That burn going down that Kentucky hug. Oh my God. I feel like my lungs are collapsing.
Yeah, dude.
Oh.
This is genuinely, dude. Listen to my voice. It's like fried. Bob, I'm not gonna lie to you. That is not what I smelled on the nose.
Oh my gosh, dude. That is harsh. Man, I feel like I'm breathing fire. I started sweating just now, Brad. Like,
yeah, that was harsh.
oh my gosh.
Honestly, I'm like having to force my tone into a bit of a lower register because if I spoke at my normal level, I think I'd be having a lot of vocal fry. This is a harsh whiskey that does not taste like what the nose gave me. It was honestly kind of thin on the front end. It was vaguely sweet.
Yep.
Like that's my official declaration. It was just kind of vaguely sweet. I don't know what specific flavors it was. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't very good.
So yeah, for me, I think it's the same. It definitely doesn't have the caramel, vanilla, dark, sweet bourbon notes to it. But on the front end, I think some of that cherry kind of came through for me. The second sip, Brad, I will say is much, much better than the first. But like my body was not was not prepared for that at all. And then once you kind of kick it to the back of your mouth, it's just alcohol, man. It's really alcohol forward. A little bit of oak. But I think that it's just kind of astringent. And then when you go to swallow, like, not to jump ahead to finish, but that was the strongest we call it the Kentucky hug. It's when you can kind of feel that chest burn as it goes down. That was the strongest Kentucky hug I've ever had on a whiskey ever. Brad, we've had bourbons that are 130, 140 proof that did not burn close to that much. I don't know what happened, but like I can still feel the first sip in my chest, and it's been 3 minutes now. Like this, it was crazy how strong and how harsh the alcohol on this was.
Yeah, Bob, I've given it a few more sips, and I think I am noticing a little bit of that cherry on the palate, which is pleasant, but it's not super present. And I am struggling with this. I'm going to give it a 4.5 on the taste. I think when I get to the finish, it just kind of, the flavor dissipates, but the burn lingers.
Yeah,
so
man.
I wouldn't call it a short finish. I guess I would say the flavor is short, but the hug is long. And normally, man, I love a nice long hug, but this is interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I'm on my third sip now, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to get the hug this time. And it happened again. Like, there's something on the molecular level of this that is, like, just destined to burn my chest on the way down. I actually think the taste is not that bad. Because we are, like, dreading the finish, I think we might be a little too harsh on the taste right now. I'm actually going to give it a 6.5 on the taste. But when it comes to finish, Brad, you know, if you're the kind of person that wants to live like you're in the Wild West and you want a whiskey that's going to make you grimace as you drink it, this is the whiskey for you. Because that is the harshest and probably the longest finish I've ever had on a whiskey. So, like, for a certain percent of the populace, I think this is like a 9 out of 10 on the finish. But for me, I don't want to give it a 1, but I'll give it a 1.5.
Ooh.
This was like, I don't know what to do with it. Like,
Yeah.
I can respect it, but it is a painful experience to drink this.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 3.5 on the finish. So it's not like I'm coming out very far above you. But yeah, the finish is rough. Honestly, for balance, I think my balance is going to be the worst score because I genuinely was kind of impressed by the nose. And then it was a steep downhill decline from there. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10 on the balance.
Yeah, man. I was debating whether to go harsh on the finish or on the balance. Because, I mean, let's be honest, the finish is what tanks the balance. So it's like, where do you want to reflect that? But you're right, Brad. It's not a very well-balanced whiskey. I do think that I want to give it a couple points higher just because the nose was so good and the taste was kind of middling. But just to reward the part of it that I liked, I'll give it a 3.5 on balance. And that takes us to overall value.
Now, technically speaking, Bob, you can get a bottle of Blanton's for $54.99 in the state of Ohio. However, you can't buy it at any liquor stores in Ohio.
Right.
Because it's always out of stock.
Yep.
So, you know, if we're being honest, you have to travel down to Kentucky. When I was in Missouri, my brother-in-law and I found it for like $68.99.
Oh, that's a great deal.
Which was a great deal because normally this is going to, you know, pop you anywhere from $70 to $150. Would you say that's a decent range?
When we lived in Kentucky, Brad, I saw it every once in a while for anywhere between $80 and $90. If you're planning around $80, I think that's probably like you're getting it at an okay deal, and that's kind of like market value. If you're paying $150, you're paying way too much. But I would say like prepare to spend $80 on this if you want to get it.
Well, and with that in mind, I'm just going to flat out say it. Bob, this bourbon is not worth $25.
Yeah, I mean, like, I probably still would prefer this over Buffalo Trace just because I like the flavor profile. But yeah, I mean, like, this shouldn't cost any more than, I would say, $30 to $35. Because again, like, if you're making a market comparison to Elijah Craig, which, by the way, I prefer way more than this should be about the same price as Elijah Craig, which I think is $35 in Ohio. So, like, you know, if you want to factor in the cool packaging, maybe 40, but that still means that it's priced about twice as high as it should be.
Well, and that kind of brings me to my value score. It's a 1 out of 10 for me, Bob.
Wow.
This is way, way, way overpriced. And not only overpriced, but it is under-delivered. Like, why is there a shortage of Blantons?
Yeah.
You know, there's got to be a part of me that says one of the tricks that Buffalo Trace pulls is that they don't make a ton of it so that it's always sold out, it's always wanted, which great. For them, it's a great business decision because they're selling a pretty crappy whiskey for $80. Good on them, I guess. We all want to make money. But man, I'm feeling very harsh. Maybe I shouldn't be this mean, but Blanton's isn't very great. And I am going to give it a 1 out of 10 on value.
I think I'm going to give it a 3.5 on value. I do think that it has the collector's item thing going for it. The packaging definitely takes up a few notches. Brad, I don't know if I would tip into saying that this is a crappy whiskey. I think it's definitely not my cup of tea. And again, if we're trying to make the sort of market comparison to Elijah Craig definitely tastes more watered down than this, even though it has that great sort of char, smoky flavor to it. This one, at least, it packs a punch. Do you know what I mean? And if this was a $35 to $40 bottle of whiskey, I would be able to say, hey, not my cup of tea, but I think you're getting your money's worth if you want like a ton of alcohol delivered into your bloodstream. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for $80, man, it's just like, maybe if you're really going for the collector's item thing, but I'm going to give it a 3.5 on value. And that's bringing my final score to a 23 out of 50. Brad, what is that bringing you to?
Bob, I'm just going to fully admit it. I am being very harsh on this whiskey because of the legendary nature of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's such a highly sought after whiskey. I think I've been more harsh than I probably should have been. But remember, I gave it an 8 out of 10 on the nose. I had high hopes. I came out to a 19 out of 50.
Wow. Now, I will say, I just took my fourth and final sip of the sample that we had, and it was a very pleasant experience. Except, again, for that chest burn. Like, it never goes away. I'm truly shocked at how, on my fourth sip, I am still getting, like, a ridiculous amount of Kentucky Hug. You know, Brad, I don't know if I'm going to recommend or not, because I think everyone should try it just to see what they think of it. But I do not recommend going and finding a full bottle of it. You know what I mean? Like, if you have a friend that has it, if you find it at a bar, you need to try it just to say you've had Blanton's and make your own decision. But I am absolutely not going to recommend you spending $80 on this.
Well, and honestly, I'm gonna give a shout out to our Instagram followers. Please let us know what we're missing here, because obviously people like this stuff. If you've had Blanton's more than once, let us know what you think. Is there something we're missing here? Is there something that we're just way off on? I just let us know. You know, you can find us on Instagram at Film Whiskey. Facebook and Twitter is the same. Please tell us, because I want to know, what do people see in Blanton's?
Yeah, so that's bringing our final score to a 42 out of 100, or an average of a 21 out of 50. I don't think either of us recommend. And so that takes us back to our movie, Brad. What do you say we carry this terrible, terrible energy into talking about Crash?
Oh, I relish it, man. Let's do it.
All right, so that was Blanton Single Barrel, a whiskey that we are incredibly underwhelmed by, and we are getting back into talking about Crash. Brad, we have crapped on this movie kind of a lot, and yet I think at the end of the day, I still think that this movie pretty much works. I don't think it's a great transcendent movie, but I'm not going to give it like a negative score at the end of the day. And so I feel like if we're going to end up coming out, I don't know where you're at, but especially for me, if I'm going to come out more on the positive side of the scale, I think we need to say something positive about it. I do think that Paul Haggis is a better director than he is writer. Some of these scenes were done really, really well. And especially when you know how little this movie cost to shoot. You know, when you only have $6 million and you're working with all these people who are working, you know, for pennies on the dollar, basically, you only get so many locations to shoot. I think that he did a really good job ratcheting up some of the tension in a few of these scenes, working in small locations, working around a limited number of locations. And so I think he deserves some credit for his direction, if not for his script. And so, Brad, I kind of want to hear some positives about this movie. maybe what was one performance that you really liked? And then is there a scene or two that you really want to talk about that you think did work really, really well?
Well, honestly, Bob, I think two of my favorite performances in this film come from, Chris Bridges, Ludacris, and his partner in the film, Lorenz Tate. And I really think that some of their conversations kind of illustrate the person who really digs into racial history and racial tensions in America versus kind of the common person who's like, man, I think you might be reading too much into this. And I think that the conversations that they have illustrate, a healthy relationship of like, hey man, I understand that these things are real, but I don't always understand it. Sometimes I just like country music because I like country music. And yet at the end of the film, you see Lorenz Tate, who is struggling with the idea of country music when it's played by a white guy. And I think that you see some healthy change in those relationships. And they truly gave two of my favorite performances in the movie. But honestly, my favorite scene of the movie is Michael Pena when he's sitting with his daughter and he's trying to explain the difficulties of living in an area of the city where you hear gunshots. And he tells her this story about how he received this cloak that protects him from bullets and knives and all these things. And that, it's time to give that cloak to her. And the way he interacts with her is beautiful and endearing. And like you said, Bob, I don't think Michael Pena is given an arc in the movie. And yet he does so much with so little. Even in the scene when Sandra Bullock is belittling him, to her husband, but right in front of him, the way he reacts, the way he kind of shoulders that burden, I think he gives a spectacular performance that I really wish we had a better script for him, because I really think he's a great actor.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. And that scene is, and also the child actress is quite good in that scene as well. Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking about scenes that work, honestly, I do think that final montage with the song, I think the song's called In the Deep, I think it works really well. And I think the intercutting is really, really great in that sequence. And again, it reminded me of how much TV has kind of ripped off this format in the last 15 years, where you just get a huge ensemble and you move them just slightly on an arc, and then the episode ends with an emotional song and a montage. Like, this movie is a giant TV episode. But I think that there are some scenes that work really well. And I guess one that I would call out in terms of the writing actually being pretty good, there's a scene where the DA calls Don Cheadle into his office. And before he gets there, the DA has basically his fixer come in and talk to Don Cheadle. And it's played by William Fichtner, who is one of my favorite character actors. If you want your movie to get better, put Bill Fichtner in the movie. And he does such a great job of showing how these shady deals get done inside an organization as corrupt as the LAPD. Because basically they ask Don Cheadle to pin the blame for this investigation on a white cop who shot a black cop. Even though the black cop may have been corrupt and on drugs, they said that it's better PR for the district attorney in an election year if we take down this white cop for doing something racist. And in order to get that done, they kind of dangle Don Cheadle's brother out in front of him and say, we know he's a felon. If he gets caught again, he's going to prison for life. We will make this go away if you pin the blame for this investigation on the white cop.
So all I need to do to make this disappear is to frame a potentially innocent man.
What are you, the fucking defender of all things white? We're talking about a white man who shot 3 black men. And you're arguing with me that maybe we're not being fair to him? You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe Lewis did provoke this, and maybe he got exactly what was coming to him. Or maybe, stoned or not, just being a black man in the valley was enough to get him killed. There was no one there to see who shot first, so there was no way to know, which means we could get this wrong.
And I think that scene is incredibly well written, and it serves its purpose really, really well. So in the middle of a script that I think is full of like stereotypes and broad strokes, I do think I should call attention to the fact that like there are still good scenes in that script.
Yeah, and the thing I really loved about that scene is that you see the nuance that people have to struggle with when they talk about race relations. Because in the end, what the fixer is talking about is true. Like, the world needs more black heroes, not people who uphold the stereotype. And so, but the problem is Don Cheadle is struggling with of like, well, maybe the black cop was dirty. And is it more important to follow the truth and justice or to try and create a better world for people of color? And that's a difficult thing. And you can feel that moral quandary. You can see the weight of it on Don Cheadle's shoulders. Now, once again, that might be reductionistic. The way he talks about this black person might have been actually a bad person. But man, the weight of that moral just gray area, I think Don Cheadle does a spectacular job. And like you said, I think Bill Fichtner does a spectacular job in that role. So you're right, Bob. There are some great scenes in this film.
Well, Brad, I think that kind of takes us to our final scores here. I don't want to belabor the point. This is a problematic movie for a number of reasons. I don't really care to weigh in on the, should it have won Best Picture? Because it did win Best Picture, and it is what it is at this point, I think Brokeback Mountain's a better movie than this, flat out. But I do still think this is a pretty good movie. Is it problematic? Sure. Does it hold up really well 15 years later? Not really. But the actors are good, the writing is okay, the direction is pretty good. I'm going to give it a 7.5. I think, it's a 3-star movie, it does 3-star movie things, and that's about all there is to say about it for me.
Bob, I'm pretty close with you. The movie's fine. I would describe it as very, very average. There's parts that move you. There's characters that are interesting. Some of the performances are really good. Some of them are not so good. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's fine. It's definitely not deserving of Best Picture. But like you said, the Oscars are a finicky thing. You never quite know what's going to happen. And that, that's part of the drama of the Oscars. And I won't say that it's always a good thing, but here we are 15 years later. I think we can definitively say, like you said, Brokeback Mountain isn't my favorite movie in the world, but it's better than this film.
Mm-hmm.
It probably should have won Best Picture over this if these two were the only ones really considered. So here we are. I'm at a 6.5. Bob, you're at a 7.5. That brings us to a 7 out of 10, which I think both of us would say, yeah, 7 out of 10. That's
sure.
About where I'd put this.
Yeah. I think it's worthwhile. Would you recommend the movie, Brad?
No.
Okay. I would. And again, I think that's the difference between a 6.5 and a 7.5. I think it's worth seeing. If this is on your 100 movies I need to see before I die thing, it doesn't need to be there. You know what I mean?
Right.
So.
Well, and that's kind of where I'm at. It's unless you really enjoy movies and want to get into movie history, I would just say, nah, you don't need to see this.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
It's fine.
All right, so that's where we fall on Crash, but we want to hear what you think. So please reach out to us. You can find us on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram @FilmWhiskey.
Or you can give us a phone call. Our phone number is 216-800-5923. Once again, that number is 216-800-5923. Let your voice be heard on the Film and Whiskey podcast. Or if you'd like to, you can leave a message right on our webpage, which is located at anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Next week, we're going to be rounding out our mini-series on the year 2005 with the movie that won its lead actress the Oscar for Best Actress. We're looking at the film Walk the Line. So join us next week for that. For the Film and Whiskey podcast, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.